My name is Martin. As got the chance to introduce ourselves, so we'll get a chance to just kind of get going from the get-go. We're this talk. I'm going to go kind of start up a little big into AI, and then get really into the practical. We had a little bit in the last panel what AI is. Essentially, it's a big term, but as we talked about, it's a nothing term as well. It's kind of like cloud. It says a lot, at the same time it says absolutely nothing. Particularly with, it can be defined as narrow, general, and super intelligent. General is like you can kind of throw anything at it, it'll give you your response back. Super intelligent is the scary take over the world. Almost all the AI we have right now is still considered narrow. It does one specific task that it's built for. So we are very far from even general AI. So ChatGPT specifically has, it's machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing. So it has kind of overlaps a few of the languages in there. But as we taught, as kind of we said before, it really is a super powerful autofill. And if you want to kind of find out a little more nuts and bolts, one of the best articles that is still accessible, but goes into a little bit more of the details, was by Stephen Wolfram. He goes into it. It's a really good article, really explain how GPT and even all the GPT, which stands for generative pre-trained transformers, and is that transformers is that cool bit of math that came out a few years ago from Google that really kind of kickstarted all this AI machine learning that really kind of changed, and all the new AI that you're seeing now, they're all different iterations of the transformer math. That new math that kind of changed the way we train models and what we can do with them. It's all different types of transformer and the way we trained it. But it all comes down to that generation things. Particularly for GPT, all that it's doing, it is looking at all the tough stuff, everything that is before, and it is figuring out that next word, what is the best probability for that it should be that next one, and picks the highest one. That it's all that it's doing. It doesn't care context. It's just from everything that it's learned, has been trained, it is picking out that next best probable word, and puts it in there, that next token, that next word. And when you step back and looks at it, it has meaning for us. To it is just picking that next best probability. It doesn't understand the context. It doesn't it doesn't know it. It's just picking that best probability. But as we know as developers, if you build a lot of little blocks, little components, when you put them together, it makes something really powerful and really amazing. And that's, in a way, that's really what this is. Going forward, and normally when the times I give this talk, we don't have an AI panel beforehand, and that's where I have this slide. When we're talking about AI, there's an old thought experiment, the Chinese room. It's not a perfect one, but it was a 1980s computer science concept. And what it does is essentially, if you have a closed room where you are putting in essentially the person outside speaks Chinese, puts it in there, and the person inside does not understand the language or the characters or anything about it. It's essentially gibberish symbols to them, but they have a book with every possible way to handle the symbols, and they just follow those rules, and what it comes out to the person on the outside, it looks like it's having a complete conversation that makes complete sense. Is the room able to understand? Is that intelligence? And that's more or less what it boils down to. And the point of the thought experiments is to really have that conversation of what is intelligence, what is it, can you trust it, like should you be doing it, should you make decisions? And to a lesser degree, that's what what these models are. And to really think about it, like if you're having a model, a GPT make decisions, should you really be letting it do that? Because it's an autofill. It is doing this. Like you as a technician, and if we were talking about AI, it's like you need to understand kind of, even if you don't understand the math or things like that, it's at a high level, you need to understand what's going on and what is doing it to know how you can push it. Like the same way when you get in a car, you sort of understand what a transmission does or doesn't. And the better you kind of have a mental model of those things, the more you can push it and not break your transmission. It's sort of that same thing. And that's what I wanted to kind of do with this is, kind of give you a mental model of what GPT, what ChatGPT is doing, so that when you're thinking about how to implement it in your applications, you know where you can push it, where you should be pushing it, and where it really doesn't make sense to push it, or even if you're using other transformer models for creating images, right? Now, getting more specific into what makes the ChatGPT or the OpenAI models apart. When it comes to it, what they have made it different from all the other machine learning models is that for us using it, it's a REST call. It is not going to be any more complicated than any call that we make to any other system. We no longer have to train a model. We no longer have to worry about training data. It is just, if you can make a post call, which you make for any website or things like that, you can add AI to whatever application you're building. And that's what I'm going to cover in the rest of this application. Same thing, it just reduces the technical challenges have now become a lot less, and it goes in there. Now, what that does is that does make it be all the challenges are now conceptual. You need to understand why you're doing the things that you're doing from a conceptual model and building it to be able to take full advantage of it. Since you're not building the model from itself, it may be easier to misunderstand or to give it something and get unexpected answers, unexpected uses. So, because you're not building the underlying technology, you may misuse it without realizing it. So, that's kind of what sets apart. Now, the main concepts that you need to understand and to take advantage of ChatGPT get narrowed down to essentially three. This is all you really need to know to use ChatGPT. You need to understand the concept of a token. I'm sure you've heard of ChatGPT. You've heard of a token. It's a word or a symbol. That's how the model creates words or reads words or breaks it apart. It's not quite a word, not quite a symbol. It's in between. That's how it counts. That's how it charges you. For 3.5 model, it's about a quarter of a cent for every 1,000. For the bigger models, 4 tends to be about 3 pennies, 3 pennies for the 1,000. This is a much bigger model. So same thing, if that's how the queries can really scale up or down, and you get to decide, more expensive, more versus the quality, and that sort of thing. Temperature is the BS meter, how random. And if we go back to that initial of what it's really doing, it is picking the best answer. So if the next best word had the best answer was 87%, but you gave it a temperature of 90%, well, it's going to pick the third best answer, the not most optimal answer, because that sounds more robotic. It turns out that when you do that, the way the math works out makes it sound more creative, makes it sound more human. But it is just picking the least optimal answer, and somehow that makes it sound more human. The worst predictive model makes it more creative. And when you're finding for your particular use, this is where you have to play around with the temperature for those responses and find which one works for which use case. Maybe one query, you need something that sounds a lot more dry, a lot more specific. For another one, the response needs to be more flowery, more human sounding, more BSy. And that's kind of where it goes. And then finally, the query, these are the messages that go back and forth. With the API, the model has no memory. You are sending everything back and forth, and it analyzes the entire conversation every time. So it is your responsibility as the developer to send it everything that it needs, and it essentially takes everything that you send it, analyzes it, and gives you an answer, and then forgets about it. With the OpenAI API, one of the good things is that if you're using when you're using the API and you're paying for it, they are not keeping any of that data for training it, so you can use it for. It gets past most legal reviews. I know that one of the big things nuances is that if you're using their chat product, they're like, oh, Samsung. You've seen the news. It's like, oh, we don't want companies. We don't want using their chat products because it'll be saved. It'll use it for training data. If you build something with the API, part of the legal documents is that they're not keeping any of that data. So that kind of gets it, and it's with the one product that was part of the legal review when it went through it, so I feel comfortable saying that as of right now, that is how it stands. But getting more back into the technical, with the query, it's a JSON. You're sending an array of messages, but each message gets categorized as two types. Either system, and this is the context behind the scenes that a user should never see. This is where you tell it like, oh, you are a friendly AI. This is the type of responses you're supposed to give. If you get this type of question, I don't ever want you to answer questions about if this application is supposed to be about parks or dogs. I don't ever want you to answer anything about sports, or I don't want you to ever answer anything about this. It's sort of how you program this, but they're just other messages. You give it to you give it in writing in the system messages, and you can give them as many as you want that'll fit within the token. Each model has a maximum number of tokens that they can process at any one time, and that's where you have to balance between the system, the users, because they all add to that final amount of tokens being used. And then the users is the conversation that it goes back and forth. So, and I have a demo. We can kind of go through that. The kind of shows the actual concepts. But that is essentially all the basics and all the concepts that you need to work and build with ChatGPT, with the OpenAI API. There's nothing more complex to that. Getting here, I have a demo, and we'll kind of work through it in the end if you want to do it phone. And then I also have a repo with the actual code for the demo in there, and that's what's in the QR code. But I'll go through it kind of in the next slides, and then we'll kind of go through it and play with the demo. But you can play it on your phone if you want as well. But you essentially, it breaks down into two parts for what you need. You have your whatever front end you want, a website, a mobile app, and things like that, and then you need your own REST endpoint, be it a backend server, a Lambda, and it's as simple as it gets. And we'll go through the different parts of it. And I wrote them out in kind of different sections. It's a post query. You get through it the first part. I'm just doing your basic, making sure you're not getting any data, and if it's empty, then we're killing it, making sure that it's in there. This is basic for any REST call, making sure if it's not empty. This is the one part, like we talked about tokens. I had split it into the system and the messages, and I am using a library to get the token count. And for the model that I was using, the limit was 4,030 something, but if it's over 4,000, I need to cause that an error before I send it, because the API, if you oversend it or abuse it, they will cancel your account. They're particularly the OpenAI API is very specific about that, or the call will fail. So you want to kind of handle, same thing, basic error handling that you would do with anything, and you could even handle it before you send it in the UI. It doesn't have to be in there, but it's just that basic sanitation. This is something that's really kind of powerful that you get from the OpenAI API that used to be very hard when you made an application that you were opening up to users to type in anything. Moderation, that they would type in something that would be sexual, that would be bad words. If you're using the API as of right now, they won't charge you for using their moderation API. Same thing. You just send whatever messages, and they'll give you some classification, but at the same time, they also give you a true or false flag if it's if it's something you want to moderate, and you can stop the message right there so that you can handle it in your application. That's something that used to be a very high level of barrier for building a product, and took, that was something that kept any, if you were building a product, that was something that only a Google or something would be able to consistently do that kind of filtering and protections, comment filtering, those kind of things. Now it's just another API call, and you can even use this one without the completion part. You can just add it to your application, and suddenly you have probably one of the best content moderation things. You can just add it to your comment systems if you have it in your application. And it's just another post call. It's another simple fetch call. And then this is pretty much a magic sauce, as we talked about it. All the query, you put back together in an array your system prompts, your message prompts, and then in the JSON, I'm putting together the name of the model, the one that I want to use. 16K is a newer version that's a little cheaper. It can take up to 16,000 tokens, but it's a little cheaper to use. It's a little faster. But if I wanted to use 4.0, I would just change that string to be GPT-4 or whichever ones, as they keep upgrading and changing it. Not a very hard not a very hard thing, and you can updating to a new model. It's literally changing a string. It's not any hard code changes. The temperature, I was getting it from the front end because I made it a slider, but it could be just a configuration in the back end. And then the messages. Stream, it's a setting that they have. I'm sure you've seen with ChatGPT, you see that kind of typewriter effect. That is just a side effect of how the model works. You're getting that type effect because that is the speed that the language model is producing the response. It is literally producing those characters as they're coming through. Like, as we talked about, is generating those characters and figuring out the best response, and then looking at all of that and generating the next bit. You can, if you set that stream value to false, it'll just take the same amount of time to generate everything and sends it back as a message. It'll take like a minute or 2 minutes to do that, or you can get them as it's server events. So it's not a WebSocket; it's server events. So you have to configure to listen to those. And so you get them, and then you send out your query, and then you just handle the response. It's something that we do essentially for almost any other API, any other call in our applications. It's basic. It's something we've done thousands of times. So for adding AI to our applications, it's very basic. One of the nice things is that if it's coded like this, you can just essentially build one API endpoint and use it for any number of future AI applications that you build. Essentially any other front-end application that you build going forward can use the exact same endpoint because there's nothing unique about it. Everything comes in the messages, in the query that you create, and the temperature. Like with those values that you encode in that message, that's all that it needs to create the response. And we will go through that. So this is the demo. And here, I kind of broken it down into, left side is the system prompt area. Here I have a token calculator, the model, the temperature, and then the right is in there. So the way those prompts would be, and I just have the button to kind of pre-fill them to make it faster, but those system prompts, there can be very, very simple, human readable text, the same way you would type it into the ChatGPT, but these are the types you don't find. So it's like, hey, your name is Steady Buddy. And then in the user interface in the front, this one is more of your typical chatbot, right? It's like, hey, how can you help me? And then because I've told them, it's like, hey, this is what you can't do. This is what you can't do. Same thing. You can change it up very quickly, and you get those responses. You can add more information to it, and as we're seeing, that whole query cost, was 429. Exact same thing, all the exact same code, but just changing the prompts. Now I want it to be to create sports stories based on stats coming out of sports. So I have the first prompt. I'm having it be the different types of reporters and some prompts of like what those the reporters should be, the style that I want it to be. Same thing. This was just kind of picked up, but the more you put into it, and this is where copywriters and people, and that kind of English and stuff comes into it. And then the next prompt is that sort of reinforcement. I tell it like, this is the type of data you can expect. Now, one of the nice things that I found out is that a prompt that I've added in the background for this is I tell it it's like always use markdown format because it's all string and it can send me the responses back then in markdown format. And then it's very easy to add styling for a UI. So that's a trick for web development. And then here I tell it's like, based on this information, this is the type of article that I would generate. And then I give it a sample. So the more that you give it, but now this one, it starts getting more expensive. This one's to 2,000, but I want this one to be done with GPT-4 because it's a more creative and more powerful. But it would go in here. So same thing here. I pre-added it with another, a similar kind of stats for a football game. And then I tell them, it's like, just pick randomly one of the personalities and generate a response. And then it tells me, like, dramatic sports writer. And then it starts writing out a response to the article. All I did was change the prompts. I created, I gave it positive reforms. I gave it examples like, this is the type of thing that you want. The more you give it, the better it'll be. If you also tell us, like, also, this is what I don't want. And that's where what you've heard of as prompt engineering really comes in. And it's a lot of guessing. A lot of kind of that, almost the best way that I was able to explain it to my product owners and things like that is almost like baking a cake. You have a lot of ingredients and you're throwing it into an oven, and when it comes out one way. It's never going to come out the same. Even if you throw the same ingredients in every time, it's always going to come out a little different, and you have to be okay with that. But you can change things a little bit here and there, a little bit more sugar, a little bit of this, but you won't know the answer until you get the output. And that's just the way of the beast right now, which is why when it was at the panel, I was saying, it's like, we need some of that tooling to know what's going on in between. Until we do that, it's so different from any of the other way we work. Usually we're used to being like, telling them, it's like, okay, if we change this is going to be the output. Right now, we don't know. I can tell you get an idea after you've done some more engineering what kind of tense things work and in there, but you're guessing. There's nothing deterministic about this right now. And then you're relying on a third-party combo. It makes it fast, it makes it in there, and it makes it really powerful, but you're relying on a third-party system, and it's a lot of black box and stuff comes out. Most of the time it's really good, but you have no idea. Yeah, and I welcome you guys to keep going, keep kind of playing it, play with the temperatures, and it's really, as you're using it, the code is there to get you going started, and as you're using it, you get used to it, and then back into this. I have two links for the prompt engineering that have some good resources. The second one was a course from actually some OpenAI. It's a free course from OpenAI engineers where they kind of go through videos and give you some of the basics of how they were thinking about it when they're making the models and what works for them. And the first one is just a lot of, it's a page with a lot of resources of things that multiple people have tried, and you'll very quickly see it's like, this worked for us in this one case, this worked for us in another case. And then as you get familiar and you start trying it out, you'll get a feel for it. But very different from any other type of the other web development work. It's a lot more of feels and trying and going for your particular use case. And I think I'm right at time. Huh? Okay. Same thing. If you guys want to follow me, I will have the slides up on my website, nextsteps.dev. In there, I'm the organizer for React Atlanta, so if you're local, please come out and join us. This QR code is for Discord. We've been making for the communities here in Atlanta. We've been making kind of a joint Discord, so there's one place you want to join, kind of have a local community, and you'll see when any one of us is putting an event, essentially one place to follow, and you kind of know of all the events that are happening. So please join up if you have questions, if you want to share. We're trying to build it up. I'm not great at the community organizing, but I'm trying. So anybody is good at it, please jump in and happy to follow. But that's it. Thank you.